So we're now going to hear from the from the Northwest London Waste Authority. Are they here? Are there any items of emergency business?
No, Chair.
And do we have any declarations of interest? No. And are there any deputations this evening?
We have no deputations, Chair.
Thank you. First, could we have a look at the minutes of the last meeting? I'll take them as read, but if we could just go through them briefly. Is there anything to note on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? 3, Phil, I have a typo in 96B. Okay. If you could just look at the third line, please, just slightly incoherent. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Okay, can we note minutes are accepted, please? We now have the presentation from the North London Waste Authority about the incinerator in Edmonton. The copy of the presentation has been provided to you in advance, so we may see it, but it's been provided already. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for waiting.
Good evening, Chair. I hope you can hear us okay.
Absolutely perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Martin Capstick. I'm the Managing Director of the North London Waste Authority, and with me is my colleague David Cullen, who is the Programme Director responsible for delivery of the North London Heaton Power Project. Thank you for the invitation tonight. What I thought I would do is not go through the slides in detail as we've provided them in advance. What I thought I'd do, if it's okay with you, Chair, is provide a brief introduction to the project, deal with what I think are the main questions which get raised about it, which are over its size relative to waste forecasts, the idea that the facility has no flexibility, it must be used to its capacity, and over whether there are alternative options. I would have thought that would probably take about 10 minutes, and obviously we'd be very happy to deal with questions. Would that suit you, Chair, if I proceeded in that way?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Right. So the North London Waste Authority is responsible for disposing of the waste which is collected from Haringey residents, along with the waste collected from residents in 6 other North London boroughs. In total, a population of over 2 million. At the moment, that population generates about 800,000 tonnes of waste a year. It's important for us to provide appropriate infrastructure for delivering our service. And this applies in all areas of public service. I'm a former school governor. I had to deal with our school had to deal with a situation when there was insufficient school infrastructure to deal with the demand for school places. We know from housing that there are kind of serious problems when there's inadequate infrastructure to deal with future demand. And the same is true in waste. It's important that we provide the infrastructure needed to deal with future demands. Our current infrastructure is nearing, particularly the energy from waste plant, is nearing the end of its life. And it will be to the benefit of the whole of North London if we can provide modern first-class facilities which enable us to provide a better waste disposal service. So the North London Heaton Power Project, first of all, includes new facilities under construction at the moment to support increased recycling and provide education and information opportunities for people to learn more about how to promote the circular economy, how to recycle more. It also includes provision of what will be the cleanest energy recovery facility in the country for dealing with the waste which can't be, which isn't recycled. And the energy recovery facility, I think it's, I would say at the beginning, is the best solution for climate in terms of waste disposal. This is an approach recommended by the government's own Climate Change Committee, and their recommendations to the government on achieving net zero include moving waste away from landfill and towards energy from waste plants. It's also it will also be the cleanest facility. Whilst energy recovery facilities obviously have to operate safely, it will not just operate safely, but it will be absolutely the cleanest facility of any facility built in the UK. It includes technology not in use elsewhere in the UK, but technology which is used in Europe. And recently on the Sir David Attenborough Earthshot programme, there was a commentary that a facility in Copenhagen, which ours is the sister facility, that that was a major contribution to clean air in the city. So I won't provide a kind of full advert, but I just think it's important to set the context for the project. But I do also understand it's important to address the issues which people ask about it. And I think the first issue which people ask, and these are covered in the slides, the first issue which people ask is whether our waste forecasts are realistic. That if the waste forecasts were lower, then no such facility would be needed. And if I turn to, actually it's in slide 4 in the pack, forecasting for the future is not simple. Actually, as the Waste Authority, we don't have any control over what manufacturers will make, what retailers will sell, what residents will buy and what residents will be disposed of. But we have got a lot of historical evidence about what people do. And the expectation of residual waste volumes in North London in 2050 are, broadly speaking, between 500,000 tonnes and 700,000 tonnes. So we are developing a facility which can cope with that range of forecasts and will give us the infrastructure we need to deal with the expected waste that will be generated in the future. The forecasts take account of everybody's aim, our aim, Haringey's aim, and other people's aims to improve recycling rates. But at the same time as improving recycling rates, we're expecting significant increase in population. And that increase in population is particularly weighted to people of economically active people who produce higher waste per capita than families, actually. And so the population will be getting bigger and will have a propensity to produce greater waste. And therefore, we sort of, to some extent, we need to run to stand still, that we need to increase the recycling rates to avoid the residual waste which is being produced at the moment growing further. And we work on that, and Haringey members and officers work to achieve that. Some people have said that waste can be significantly reduced. Nobody has yet come up with a concrete plan to achieve that. As I say, our facility is predicated on the basis that we will achieve improved recycling rates, and we will, and some of that could be delivered by activities in Haringey and by the North London Waste Authority. But as I say, the people who argue that significantly lower volumes of waste can be anticipated do not have a delivery programme for dealing with that, and failure to anticipate the volume of waste that we have coming could lead to a serious shortfall in capability to deal with waste and a serious expense in responding to that. Our plans take account of ambitious but realistic expectations of recycling in line with the targets set by the Mayor of London. Now, that then leads on to the scope of the facility itself, and I've provided some information on this on, where are we? Apologies, on slide 10 around the flexibility of the facility, because one of the things which is said about the facility is that it has a total capacity which, if it was full all the time, would be 700,000 tonnes per year. And the claim is made that, therefore, there is a need for it to operate at that level. That's not correct. The facility, of course, has an operating envelope and is able to operate well below its full capacity. It could easily cope with dealing with volumes of waste around 500,000 tonnes per year, which is significantly below current levels and below the levels that we are forecasting even with high recycling rates. That's an important point, because members have been, certainly our authority members have been anxious to ensure that they have the flexibility to make decisions about use of the facility, so that if we build a facility which is capable of dealing with a wide range of possible future outcomes and give North London the assurance that it has a disposal route, then the question about how we take the benefit if we succeed in reducing residual waste, our members are very clear that we should have a facility that gives the flexibility to burn lower volumes of waste if we succeed in producing lower volumes of waste. So that's an element which is often lost in the public debate. As I say, with people suggesting that what we will do is not recycle in order to fill the facility. And I think the argument that Haringey members would be complicit in Haringey deliberately minimising recycling in order to fill a newly constructed energy from waste facility doesn't feel to me to be a very realistic outcome. But also, one of the arguments that's said is that the purpose of the facility is to import waste, and that's clearly not the case. The purpose of the facility is to deal with the range of forecasts which have been produced, but with an understanding that the future is uncertain. There is certainly no obligation to import waste, and as I've said, members have been very clear that they wish to retain the right to determine the use of the facility if we're successful in bringing down waste. And then finally, probably for this introduction, if I may, I'd address the information which I've put on slide 9, which is a suggestion that by doing alternative technologies, we could avoid the need for an energy from waste facility. And in relation to that, it is certainly true that we want to employ as many effective arrangements as we can. This week, the authority has just had started. We've become the first authority in the country to recycle expanded polystyrene packaging, the sort of polystyrene packaging that can now be brought to our reuse and recycling centres, where it will be compacted and turned into new material for insulation and other uses. We are the first authority to have done that. We've also introduced arrangements for recycling of mattresses, which are a very problematic material. They contain something like 20 different materials and are therefore very hard to recycle, but we've entered into a new contract to do that. So we're very keen to increase recycling, and some of the facilities which have been suggested to us have been the creation of a larger sorting facility or a mechanical biological treatment facility, which would take, in order to put every ton of North London waste through those facilities, with the view that so much recycling would be extracted that there would be no need for an energy recovery facility. There is no experience anywhere which demonstrates that that is the case. And as I've put on slide 9, examples of cases where people have introduced such facilities is they certainly have extracted some recyclate, but the percentages that they've extracted have been small percentages. Sometimes that has raised a question of cost effectiveness because it's a very expensive way to increase recycling, but also more generally in relation to the argument that that represents an alternative to an energy recovery facility. Even the great successes which have extracted 8 or 9% of material would still leave North London with well over 500,000 tonnes of waste. And North London needs a clean, climate appropriate solution which deals with the waste that is generated and that we have a statutory duty to dispose of. So I hope that that's a taster and has given some flavour of what I say are, I think, the issues which have been raised with the Scrutiny Committee and are the most regularly raised issues with us. But obviously I'm very happy to take questions, and if we've missed the target, that will certainly give you an opportunity to let us know if there's some other areas that you would like to explore with us.
Thank you for your presentation. We have had delegations come to speak to us about the Waste Authority. And as you've noted, the primary concerns are regarding the scale, the size of the facility, and how it would operate at a lower capacity. Now, you've said that it could operate at as low as 500,000. What I'd like to know is, while I appreciate we may not be talking about importing waste, in the presentation you talk about other waste facilities around London or in the area possibly closing down. What I'd like to know is, within your plans, are you considering getting the waste that would have gone to those facilities redirected to Edmonton?
So the answer to that is no. At the moment, we are still a few months away from starting construction of the energy recovery facility, and our plans at the moment are around successful delivery of the assets and the operation of ensuring it operates successfully, serving North London's needs. So we are not at the moment envisaging going out and seeking waste from other people. Certainly the argument is made, and I refer to it in my slides, that sort of London doesn't need this facility, that there's plenty of waste elsewhere, the implication being that North London should send its waste somewhere else, probably south of the river, for disposal. And what I was doing there was sort of demonstrating that if we didn't build the facility, then there would not be enough capacity in London to take North London's waste. The question about how London uses its capacity is at the moment a sort of a matter for individual authorities to determine their contracting policy, and then for people to bid for work, bid for waste as appropriate. And as I say, at the moment, certainly our expectation is that we would be serving only North London, and the existing facilities have contracted their waste under whatever contracts they have their waste. I don't have visibility of those because many of them have a degree of commercial confidentiality. Sorry, that was a long answer. I was trying to give the flavour.
Thank you. That's useful. If I, Councillor Emery, you have a question?
Hi, Martin. I'm not sure if you remember me. Me and Councillor Corey Harrison visited the Eco Park last month, I believe it was. Yes, indeed. Okay, so the question I've got here to start with, the incinerator is set to be built in an area of North London, which is one of the most deprived parts of the UK, with residents facing poor health due to this. Considering the extra air pollution and therefore the obvious impact on health this will produce, do you not consider this site to be unfit for use?
So the site is zoned as a waste management area. It is currently in operation for waste management. The new facility that we're building will, first of all, operate, as I said earlier, at it will be the cleanest facility in the whole country, and we expect that the emissions from it will be undetectable for all bar a couple of days per year, and even on the days when it's detectable, emissions in the area will be far below air quality maxima. So we think that it will operate highly successfully. We are. I'll hand over to David, who's got some.
I'll just,
if I may.
Yeah, I'll just come in on that. There is an assumption that the energy from waste facility is going to be a major polluter in the area, and that's simply not the case. The air quality will improve as a result of the new facility once the existing facility is replaced. And to give some idea of the scale, the Industrial Emissions Directive sets a safe level at 200. Can't remember what the units are, but it's 200. Our agreement for licensing with the Environment Agency is set at 80. Our expected performance is between 10 and 15, and that's for nitrous oxides. And it's a similar scale for particulate matter as well, and carbon monoxide. So the simple assumption that this facility is going to be a major polluter is simply wrong. Also, if any of you saw the David Attenborough documentary, you will note that the spokesman for the facility said that 50% of the space in the facility is given over to emissions control. And that's exactly the same in our facility. It will be the first time that selective catalytic reduction has been employed. And the wet and dry scrubbing system, sorry for the technical terms, but the emissions scrubbing system is highly effective. When you then take it down. Sorry, we're getting feedback here, so it makes it difficult to talk. When you then take into account the fact that the emissions are at a high level through the top of the stack, Martin was quite right to say that the studies are predicting that the pollution concentrations at ground level, which is where the human beings are, will be effectively zero. They will be too small to be detectable, except for a few hours of the year, not days, when they will be no more than 2% of the safe the safe levels, according to the Industrial Emissions Directive.
So just to come back on that, obviously it will improve in comparison to the current incinerator, but obviously it certainly wouldn't improve on no incinerator. You mentioned the Nox limits, obviously very important, but there is no safe limit for particulate matter. That's true, yes, in terms of health standards, which this site will produce, correct?
Yeah, but the particulate emissions are extremely small. So that I say, by the time you look at the concentrations at receptor level, they are effectively zero. In actual fact, the bagging filters and the wet and dry scrubbing system that we use for emissions control is extremely effective at the reduction, the removal of particulates.
Yeah. And I just add that one of the things which is kind of people talk about is London failing to achieve World Health Organization standards for particulates. And my understanding, I believe it's in a GLA report, is that actually if there was no economic activity in London, London would not meet World Health Organization standards for particulates because of emissions coming into the area from outside. So again, there are obvious constraints about what can be achieved with or without our energy recovery facility. And as David has described, we believe that our facility will operate safely.
One last one, quick one. Do you see a future where the UK no longer needs waste incineration?
So what the climate change committee says is that which is looking particularly at a carbon future, is that energy from waste remains is expected to remain, certainly for the next 40 or 50 years, the most effective way of dealing with waste in the lowest carbon way. And they propose that this should be allied with carbon capture and storage, which we're very enthusiastic and passionate about. And we are, one of the benefits of creating a new plant is that we will be able to prepare it. It doesn't include carbon capture, but to make it carbon capture ready. And I would have thought that certainly for my lifetime and beyond, responsible energy from waste facilities of some description, allied to appropriate carbon capture technology, will be a part of the waste treatment system. And the fact that we're building a facility that will be at the highest level of that is something that we think is a good result.
Thank you both.
Are there any other questions that we have? Yes, if you'd like to answer.
Good evening. Just a quick question. Are there any economies of scale in the extent to which your facility will be used? Or to put it another way, if it was operating at half or 2/3 capacity, would it be relatively more expensive than if it was operating at your full capacity?
I think I'd turn that around the other way, which is, if I may, very presumptuous of me, is that we've considered whether building facilities of different sizes would lead to significant economies. And actually building the facility that we are building, or compared with building a smaller one, there is very little difference in the cost. And therefore, in terms of economies, it's much more rational to build a facility of the size that we are doing, with the flexibility that we're building in. Obviously, if you put in 10%, it is definitely true that if you put in 10% less waste, it would not be 10% cheaper to operate, because labour will be relatively, well, some things will vary. For example, the amount of chemicals that you use to ensure that the emissions are clean, things like labour, non-domestic rates, the interest that we'd be paying on having borrowed to support the investment. Although at the moment borrowing rates for a public sector authority are less than 2%. Compared, which is remarkable value to fund investment at the moment. So I think that it's definitely true that in operations, as I say, you wouldn't achieve economies which are equivalent to if operating below capacity, you wouldn't get a proportionate saving. But the counterpoint is that in terms of the investment, if you were to build a smaller facility, you wouldn't achieve material savings, but you would run a significant risk of having to spend a lot of money either subsequently expanding the facility or sending our waste elsewhere. So that risk balance, sorry, we've just lost the picture. I hope we're still on. That risk balance, I'm not feeling positive about this. That risk balance is. Oh, we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
You are still. We can
right.
still see you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, apologies. You've disappeared off our picture. So so I think that the risk balance lies in favour of the size that we are building, but I certainly acknowledge that what one is doing is making judgments. I hope that's a helpful answer.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Constable.
Thanks. I'm going to preface my contribution by it seemed a good idea at the time, and it seemed a good idea at the time to share this report with some residents in my ward and a few beyond that I know I've got some concerns about this, and the stuff that came back went completely over my head, quite frankly, as is their wont. So I just wanted, through you, Chair, just to get some guidance. If I pull the questions together into an email and ping them across to North London Waste, would you be willing to furnish me with some answers? Is that okay?
Yes.
I can get your go on, sorry.
Sorry, I apologise. Our picture hasn't come back, so I can't quite see when you've finished. I'll let you finish and then.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask that I've got some quite detailed, intricate questions from some residents in my ward and beyond about this particular proposal around incineration and such like. And if I can ping them across to you, would you be able to give me a response within, say, 10 working days? Is that okay?
Gideon, what I would suggest that you do is we do it through the committee. So if you send the questions to Phil, he can send them on for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to say, we'd be very happy to do that. I'm sure we can meet the deadline that you propose. One of the things that we are, kind of anxious, and one of the reasons why we welcome the invitation tonight is that we understand that some people have passionate feelings about this. But what is important to us is that facts and the situation, there is at least a shared understanding of facts, even if people have different opinions about what to do with the facts. And therefore, we'd welcome the chance to provide a response to any concerns that people have.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming and speaking to us this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks to the committee for asking those questions. We now have the council leader with us, who is going to give us an update on on her portfolio with regard to community safety, and we'll take questions afterwards. Yeah. Is the Borough Commander online? Okay, sorry, I couldn't see that the Borough Commander was online at the time. I understand. Could we have a picture up? Oh, perfect. Thank you very much. So this is a joint presentation to us as a committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to give my presentation first of all?
I think that would be most useful, and then we can, and then the leader can come in after you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Firstly, I'd just like to introduce my colleagues who are with me tonight to hopefully assist you with any questions you may have. So I've got Superintendent Chris Jones, who is the MPT portfolio lead. I've got Detective Superintendent Seb Adji-Odda, who is the public protection lead. And I also have Detective Inspector Paul Ridley, who is my violence lead. for the BCU. So hopefully between us, we will be able to answer any questions that you may have. I'm just going to share my presentation. I've been asked to provide you with an overview of my current priorities. Can you see that on the screen? I think you can. I think you see it on the screen there. So, in terms of priorities for North area, which includes Haringey, there are a number, as you can see. There are 12 priorities which I have. They are knife crime victims under 25, homicide reduction, lethal barreled gun charge offences reduction, robbery offence reduction, and burglary offence reduction. So there are targets around reducing offences, and in the main across Haringey we are achieving those aspirations. And then we have
sorry, Borough Commander, is it possible to show this in presentation style so we can see that? Yeah, it might be a bit. No, maybe remove the next slide preview. I'm sure there's a.
So that's my presentation mode. I'm clicking there.
Like, I don't know if you could do like a full screen that doesn't show us what your next slide is going to be.
Let me have a look.
I think, okay, you could go back.
You're confusing me now.
No, if you leave this screen.
Leave the screen?
Yeah, that you're currently on. Sorry, I've been doing this a lot, so I think I know the problem. So if you go back to the previous screen where it shows all of it, there you go. On your bottom right, there is where the little two bars are on the right at the bottom. There's a sort of a presentation icon. If you click on that.
I press that, and that's what happens.
Oh, I don't know. That's fine. Just carry on.
If you could just describe the slide to us quite slowly, because we can't read it clearly.
Okay, so,
in the room.
have you got a slide in front of you which shows you a number of red and green squares?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so those 12 squares describe my priorities for Haringey. The green squares relate to the reduction in offences, and that green shows that we are on target to achieve our aspirations in terms of offence reduction. So you can see there that knife crime, homicide, lethal barrel gun discharge, robbery and burglary are on track. The red squares relate to detection rates. So a sanction detection is where an offence has been resolved through a formal sanction, such as caution or charge. And as you can see, that is our challenge at the moment in terms of trying to achieve our aspirations. But what I wanted to show you is the current targets, or sorry, the current priorities for Haringey.
Sorry, can I just interrupt a quick second? Right click, as in right click.
Yeah.
And then end presenter view or hide presenter view. You can see it about halfway down.
Yeah.
And then try it again.
What? Click on the
slideshow, yeah.
Yeah.
If that works.
Is that any better?
Are we in slideshow mode now, are we?
Yeah, you should be.
Okay.
Oh, good. Right, I'll carry on. So that's they're our targets or aspirations. Moving on to the next slide. This is specific performance in relation to Haringey. Violence with injury, number of offences, 2019 compared to 2021, 2,777 versus 2,491, which is a 10% reduction. Total knife crime, 2019 927 offences. 2021, 530 offences, a reduction of 43%. Personal robbery, 2019, there were 2,391 offences. 2021 so far, 1,210, which is a reduction of minus 49%. Residential burglary, 2019, 2,433 offences. 2021, 1,801 offences, which is a reduction of 26%. Hate crime for 2019, 728. 2021 to date is 950, which is an increase of 31%. Lethal barreled weapon discharges, as you can see, we've had some really good months there, where we've had 0, we had 2 in September, and most of the months apart from March we had 1 lethal barreled weapon discharge. And then total gun offences on the right peaked in September, where we had 6. Below that, we've got the number of SD rate for violence with injury, which for the last 12 months is 11%. And then we've got total knife crime, again, it's at 11%. Personal robbery is at 6%. And residential burglary at 3%. So you can see that our challenges are in achieving those detections. I'm pleased to say, and I'll move on to hate crime, we've got one of the highest levels of sanction detection rates for hate crime, which is really positive from the BCU's perspective, and a lot of hard work has gone into achieving that detection rate. And of course, a detection is a really positive outcome for a victim, which is utmost priority. The figures below that just give a 20-week average between 2020, 2021, last 20 weeks, and you can see that in TNOs and violence with injury is an increase. So we are starting to see an increase now in some of these offences. However, knife crime remains in a positive direction, as does personal robbery. Residential burglary has gone up slightly by 6%. To some extent, that was expected to happen because obviously with the pandemic and people coming back to work, there's more opportunity for a burglar to enter premises, etc. And then below there, you've got 5-year averages, and then for the year 1920, and again the last 4 weeks. So hopefully that gives you an interesting oversight to where we are. Just a little bit more on hate crime. So you can see there that the number of hate crimes for the financial year to date started above, then equalled, then fell below, and now just starting to rise slightly for the same period to last year. The hate crime detection rate, as I've already said, is the second highest in London, which from my perspective is extremely positive. I'll then move on to domestic abuse and rape. So you can see rape offences, total of 194 from April this year to present, and DA offences, as you can see, fairly consistent each month between the high 200s and into 300s. So that's in relation to DA and rape. And then homicides. This is a comparison between 2019-20, when you can see that non-DA murders for Haringey were 5. For the year 2020-21, we had a total of 7. And so far this year, we've had a total of 5. The other thing I just wanted to cite you on, I know it's of concern to many residents, and I was at the Somali community meeting yesterday, and this was discussed in quite some length, and I'll invite Superintendent Chris Jones, who leads on this, to perhaps provide some further detail after I finish my presentation. But Turnpike Lane, just some offences details there in terms of the increases that we're seeing. So overall, Haringey for arson and criminal damage is seeing a 1% reduction, but for Turnpike Lane and Duckett's Common, we've seen a 100% increase. All burglary across Haringey seen a 13% increase, but in terms of Turnpike Lane, we're seeing a 120% increase. Drug offences, I'm pleased to say, are down by 41%, which is higher than the Haringey average in total. Miscellaneous crimes down 60%, which again is above the Haringey average. Possession of weapons has remained the same for Turnpike Lane, but a 29% reduction compared to a 29% reduction for Haringey. Public order offences have seen a 61% increase year on year, and that compares to a 10% increase across Haringey. All robbery offences for that area, 217% increase compared to a 31% reduction for Haringey overall. Sexual offences, 150% increase compared to a 15% increase for Haringey. And theft offences, again an increase compared to a 4% reduction overall for Haringey. Vehicle offences, 72% increase compared to a reduction of 1% overall. Violence against the person, I'm pleased to say, is minus 18% compared to a 6% increase for Haringey. And then homicide, 20% increase for Haringey, and we've seen one murder in that area year on year. Violence with injury, 41% reduction compared to a 5% reduction for Haringey overall. And violence without injury, 4% reduction compared to a 12% increase for Haringey. So obviously that's of concern, and I'll ask Chris to come in and give you an overview of what we are doing in partnership with both Haringey Local Authority and other key partners. This slide just gives you an idea of some of the offences that, or the crime breakdown for the area. As you can see, it's varied: burglary, robbery, sexual offences, etc. It just gives you the percentage breakdown. And then the final slide is in relation to the temporal distribution of offences. And as you can see, the busy periods tend to be between 12 and 3 in the morning. And obviously Chris will advise what we're doing around that as well. So Chris, can I just bring you in at this point and just ask to give a little bit more detail around the work that's been going on in relation to Turnpike Lane, please?
Thank you, Simon. So first things first, I think there's some fantastic partnership coordination going on. So I chair a meeting with Hubert Malcolm, Head of Community Safety of Haringey, and we chair a meeting with numerous partners, including Transport for London, British Transport Police, but also various police teams and local authority enforcement ASB teams. That has been, that started really successfully in terms of coordinating and having a consistent approach from the police and partners really around our expectations and those of the public around what we're doing around Turnpike Lane. So that meeting started really for each organisation to put a plan on the page to see how we could cooperate with each other, how we could share information, but also how we could join forces to conduct various mechanisms to reduce crime and disorder within that area. Operation Taipan, which is a neighbourhood-led initiative to tackle drugs and violence. That team has been fully operating in the Turnpike Lane area since the 1st of October, and they've had some absolute tremendous results in terms of arrests. So I have the exact figures here, which I'm going to circulate to the group, but in essence, multiple arrests for known gang members for possession with intent to supply. a prolific burglar from the Haringey Passage, known to frequent the Haringey Passage and the Ladder Roads, and numerous other offences for breach of community protection notices, and there's some really fantastic work on down there. So in conjunction with our partners, we are doing environmental surveys, we are putting in design out crime operations. The Met Police have funded 4 CCTV cameras to be put into those hotspots. They're temporary cameras, but they will assist us identifying those that have been arrested and that are on bail, or those that have been given community protection notices to stay out of the area because they've been committing crime and disorder. And that will help us monitor whether they're coming back into it and whether we can then deal with them with further breaches or further offences. Part of those partners around the table are the Drugs Intervention Team, and they've been doing outreach work along with some of our faith leaders who we've engaged with, certainly at Whiteman Road Mosque. Today, it's probably worth just highlighting to the panel that the Wood Green Town Centre team comes into place on the 6th of December. So that is an additional set of officers to neighbourhoods to concentrate in the Turnpike Lane and Wood Green High Road area. So that's 1 inspector, 3 sergeants and 21 constables. Today we had a open day really with the team. So we had our head of our independent advisory group for Haringey. We had some Haringey partners come up to Edmonton Police Station to meet those colleagues. And we have discussed with Hubert Malcolm around having a more senior community and partners interaction day at Whiteman Road Mosque for leaders, etc., to meet the teams moving forward. So some phenomenal work which I can share in more detail with the group and which can be published. But we are heading in the right direction. And probably finally, I know Ian Sigraves is on the panel, but last night I attended the LCSP community meeting to talk about some of the issues, ongoing issues in the ladder, but also in Turnpike Lane. And I would say that anecdotal feedback is positive, headed in the right direction, and making a significant indent into the issues that are being occurring down there. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's really useful. Chair, are there any further questions?
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the panel? Sorry. Would you like to comment on what's happening? Okay. Well, it was just okay. We'll take questions after the update from the leader. That's fine. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, we're going to have the update from the leader.
Sorry, Simon, we keep bumping into each other this week, don't we? So I guess I've not sat in front of the panel since becoming leader and since taking on the community safety portfolio. So just to say that I became leader end of May, and I think literally 24 hours after that there was a murder and shooting in Turnpike Lane, less than 24 hours. And obviously Simon and Chris have outlined some of the actions that have been taken, but I was quite clear when I come into post that, you know, Turnpike Lane was an absolute priority. I'm looking at Ian because obviously we have lots of conversations around Turnpike Lane, and I know that when I spoke to Trina and then subsequently Simon, Turnpike Lane is that, you know, it's the problem that it never goes away. So certainly a lot of effort has gone in from the police, but also from our end as well. There's been a lot of joint working. Aside from some of the things that have been outlined there in terms of policing, one of the things that I think everyone's quite clear on is you can't police your way out of a problem, right? And, you know, there's lots that needs to happen and is going to happen in Turnpike Lane that will seek to address some of these concerns. So we did have a forum which met. We're slightly going to update that forum, which is having a Turnpike Lane strategy forum, which will include traders and relevant parties, including, you know, Haringey and and the police and, you know, highways officers, parking officers, etc., but a whole load of people that are going to come together in terms of a strategy for that particular area, in addition to the group that Chris and Hubert is chairing. So I think we just have to be quite clear. The reliance on clearing up the area cannot be just on the police. There's a responsibility on us as well, and I think we're all quite clear on that and working on that as a strategy. I just wanted to say a bit about hate crime as well. I don't think Simon gave any stats there, but in terms of what we're doing, there is a anti-discrimination campaign that we're currently working on. That's going to be an ongoing campaign. It's going to run for a while, so there's lots of opportunities for everyone to get involved. But that's basically going to be focusing on all the main types of discrimination that people face, and there have been meetings with specific community groups over the past 6 months, including the Jewish community, which included members from all across Haringey, so not just Stamford Hill, which would be the obvious, but across, you know, Muswell Hill, Highgate, etc. So that meeting took place as well. Obviously, women and safety is a huge issue, and I think it's certainly been on everyone's radar locally. We have had meetings around women and safety, which included some local women's organisations. Simon has a dedicated officer, Seb, I believe, that works on this agenda. We have officers, and we did a survey, which some of you may recall. We did a women and safety survey, which was linked to some funding that we wanted to apply for at that point, and we had, you know, 2,000 responses. So that's really high up on the agenda, and I think in terms of response, obviously, again, the police colleagues have, you know, they've got their response, but in terms of what we do as well, it's looking at public realm issues, looking at lighting, looking at ways that we can make the area safer for everyone, and yeah, and so we're continuing to work on that. And just something on community engagement. One of the things that emerged again from the piece around Turnpike Lane and linked to some of the gang issues there is that there are specific communities that I felt as a council we hadn't really been engaging with and hadn't done, so there was huge gaps. So I did, along with Simon, hence why I said good to see you again, we did have a meeting with the Somali community yesterday. And what we did there was bring together, you know, so Simon came as the Borough Commander. We had senior managers and officers from the NHS, from housing, myself, the Chief Executive of the Council. And that was really to say, we know that two of the young men that were killed in Turnpike Lane out of the 3 that have been killed in the past 6 months were of Somali origin. We know that there was links to the murder of David Amos, not that the murderer lived in Haringey, but there were links with family members. And I think in terms of the repercussions then for the community, and also us wanting to sit down and actually listen to what the concerns were directly from them, it was really important. And as is the case, there was issues around housing, and it wasn't just policing, and I hope you find that useful as well, Simon. So that's just some of the work around the community engagement piece and just identifying gaps. I think that term around early intervention, so not just relying on people getting into the criminal justice system and how we respond. Actually, there is an issue around gangs. What do we do? How do we try to resolve that in an early intervention way? Is that okay? I mean, I'll leave it there, but if there's any questions for either myself or Simon. Okay,
Yeah,
so...
Jerry, if I could just come in there. Would it be useful for the panel to hear from Seb around the piece around violence against women and girls?
I thought we'll take some questions. Councillor Juha?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Simon. Nice to meet you virtually. I know we've been sort of planning a meeting to have further discussions. I may be a little bit behind in certain things, but I think some of my questions relate very much to intervention, as well as just trying to get an update on some of the other things that had been discussed, both in this panel and more in general. Just firstly, the first one refers to sort of slide 12 of your presentation, which talks about the sort of overall increase in sexual violence. I mean, it's staggering in sort of the Turnpike Lane, Dockers Common, but also across the borough as well. Whilst it's great to see positive change in robbery, what I wanted to find out is what we are doing specifically, because I don't think I've actually heard anything about that, to tackle violence against women, not just in Haringey, but of course across the country, which has become and which has come to the fore. And we have also spoken on this on the council about violence against women. So that's my first question. So I'm not sure who's going to take that. My second one related to hotspots. So there has been mentions about hotspots across the borough. I do know that before, I know you mentioned the temporary CCTV, but with the formal, the council who I was shadowing on crime and communities issues, there were discussions about not just installing CCTV, but also using some sort of capital to design some of these hotspots so that it can deter crimes. And a number of hotspots were earmarked for this work. Specifically for me as a Moswell councillors, some hotspots were marked out, but also across the borough. And I just wanted to know what was going on, because I know there were like works around redesigning those areas, maybe painting it, installing CCTV, just doing general work to deter crime. And then hate crime, this is something that I raised very, very early on a few years ago. Specifically, there has been an increase in hate crime, but I wanted to know what our focus was on victim support. And the leader obviously mentioned the Somali community who, to add that in, who obviously have been facing a lot of hate crime, specifically after the David Amos news and just in general. And beyond the Somali community, we obviously mentioned the hate crime around, or anyone from an ethnic minority background or protected characteristics. I know, again, with the predecessor, there was a discussion to have a sort of a cross-party meeting. So that, I guess this is for the leader, a cross-party sort of educational training about dealing or how to be better in sort of hate crime. I know we had one on far-right hate crime, but it was meant to be across the board on anti-Semitism, racial hate crime. And I just wanted to get a bit of an update on where that is going. So sorry, those are all of my questions that I've had in my head, and this presentation has sort of brought them back up.
I'm sorry, if I could ask the leader to come in on the violence against women strategy and what we're doing in the borough, as it is one of the leader's priorities.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should also bring in Seb, who's working, who's a dedicated officer on that, and that's who Simon referenced. Before you do, Seb, I was just going to say, Councillor, before you mentioned it being an issue nationally and London-wide. So myself and well, actually, it was a cross-party letter. Women councillors, we did write to the police commissioner to Cressida Dick, asking for some immediate action with 10 points in there, including the Met. Taking it seriously and making sure that the issue of institutional misogyny is high on the agenda. So that was an action taken. But I'll ask Seb if you want to come in, if that's okay, Chair.
Thanks, Leader. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Detective Superintendent Seb Adjiado, and I lead public protection for North Area BCU. So I report, my direct boss is Mr. Crick. What I would start by saying is I know the term institutional misogyny. I do think a lot of the issues that we're seeing are societal issues. They're not issues unique to the MPS. You will find sexism and misogyny in pretty much all institutions. So I do think it's something that it is society-wise, and therefore the approach must be multi-agency. It's nothing that the police can solve. Absolutely, it must be that multi-agency approach. With different ideas, different perspectives, particularly from women and young girls, on how we tackle this issue. So I'll just start with that premise. I think what's been really exciting is our link up with Haringey in particular. So I had a meeting yesterday with Manju Lukman, who is the VORG lead for the borough, and I think there's some really exciting stuff. I'll start off by saying that we take this issue incredibly seriously. Most of the boroughs across London, the VORG lead it's typically a detective inspector or detective chief inspector. Within our own BCU, I, as head of public protection and detective superintendent, lead for the borough on VORG. And we have a holistic setup around this issue, where we've got all different strands across the BCU looking at this issue and prioritising it. With that leadership, we have set up Operation Hearthstone. So this is a dedicated team of 15 officers dedicated to...
Sorry, Operation what? Sorry.
Operation Hearthstone. I should spell it for you. So it's HARTSHOLME. So that's Operation Hearthstone. It's a 15-strong team dedicated towards VORG in the BCU. And one of their primary starting points is looking at sexual perpetrators. We know it's not about women and girls changing their behaviour. It's us really disrupting the behaviour of sexual predators. So one of the first things they've been doing is tackling our outstanding named suspects around sexual offences. And I'm pleased to say we have the lowest number across the Met currently for outstanding sexual offence suspects. And that's just down to the work of this team, working round the clock to find where these individuals are, arrest them and bring them to justice. So that's been really, really positive. And just further alongside that, we now have a local VORG plan. I know Cressida, our commissioner, introduced an MPS VORG action plan. We've taken aspects of that on board and made that bespoke to our boroughs that we police. So we have a dedicated plan. There's been some fantastic input from Joe Benmore, also Manju Lookman, and also our partners in Enfield. So we've put this plan together. There is a heavy stint in terms of enforcement, but there's also engagement as well. So those are two areas that we're looking at. In addition to that, we're also looking at education in schools, because a lot of the issues that we're seeing is the nature of social media and the access to some quite extreme stuff on social media. So there's an educational piece going on with our schools officers, providing that input to schools across the borough. So just in summary, I think the three things for me around what we're doing, I think it's firstly leadership and actually prioritising this, and we are doing that. I think secondly is having a structured plan on what we're trying to achieve with clear outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And I think the third and probably the most important aspect is that multi-agency approach. So the local plan that I drafted was sent out to Joe Benmore, was sent out to Manju Lookman, was sent out to various partners who gave some tremendous feedback, and we've altered the plan according to that feedback. So I think those three lines or those three areas of approach will hold us in good stead in terms of Haringey and VORG.
Thank you. You had a couple of other questions as well.
I was going to say that the answers are really relating to violence against women and institutional misogyny. I did have questions about hotspots and the design of hotspots. And then, of course, I also had questions about hate crime, specifically victims, supporting victims of hate crime.
Who can take... Councillor Ahmed, can you take a question on whether we are designing out our hotspots and what we're doing on that?
Crime hotspots, whether there are any plans, and I know with your Councillor Blake, there were discussions to earmark hotspots for redesign to deter crime, in addition to including CCTVs. Just if there was an update on that.
So I can see Hubert's appeared on the screen. So do you want to just say something about CCTV, because there's quite a lot going on.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Chair. And I can see that Simon's got his hand up as well. So I think Councillor referred to the slide deck that we've produced that highlights some of our hotspots. I'm sure members of the panel will be aware of our £4 million investment into CCTV across the borough. That's currently being rolled out. I think we covered it in Wood Green, we've covered Finsbury Park. That has been rolled out after we have identified some of our hotspots in the borough. Simon mentioned some of our robberies, some of our homicides. The CCTV coverage has specifically been placed in those positions where we have incidents when we've done some data mapping. In terms of what we're doing about designing out crime, one of the boards that we have is a problem partner solving meeting where we sit down, we look at hotspots across the borough, and what we would do in partnership is design out issues. Simon has mentioned the MPS designing out team. We have used their services in Duckett's Common, for example. We've had them in Finsbury Park. Where we have identified these hotspots, we have used that team to really target, harden some of those areas and design those that has been successful. So just a quick update for me, Chair. I'll hand over to Simon as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hubert. At this point, if I'd just like to ask Paul Ridley to update the panel on the work that the police are doing around hotspots in terms of violence hotspots and some of the really innovative work and problem-solving approach that's going into try and resolve some of those hotspot areas in Haringey. So, Paul, could I ask you to just give an update to the panel, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Borough Commander. Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Ridley. I'm representing Superintendent Joe DeRillo this evening, responsible for violence. As the Borough Commander said, there's some terrific work that's been going on around identifying the hotspots and obviously trying to combat the violence within those hotspots. And we have identified those key areas to focus on. We've been intelligent about it in respect of reviewing previous statistics and ensuring that we have all our resources in the right places and relying on intelligence from our officers who are the eyes and ears on the ground to ensure that we're directing our resources in those places to try and suppress any violence and reduce any violence and repeat incidents occurring. As Hubert said, we've been utilising the Design Out Crime team on a number of initiatives, and indeed in June this year, Holcombe Market was identified as a concern in the Bruce Grove area, and the Design Out Crime team came in and provided some short-term, medium-term and long-term recommendations around trying to improve the environment and reduce offences, particularly around antisocial behaviour and robberies, which we know obviously residents are extremely concerned around. Those proposals included additional CCTV, fencing, removing shrubbery or item, or sort of looking at the topography of the area and making sure that it's safe for the residents and not allowing criminals to associate in that area. And that was successful, and those recommendations are still being put in place. In respect to the hotspots, as you'll see later on in the agenda pack, a lot of them do refer to the east of the borough. So those specific wards, which you'll all be familiar with, of Knoll Park, Northumberland Park, Tottenham Green, Tottenham Hale. Those are also particularly prevalent for robberies, and as a result, we do focus a lot of our efforts in there. In respect to the resources that we deploy, we have both plainclothes and overt uniformed officers in those areas to try and deter the criminals, but also the covert plainclothes officers to try and identify any suspects and arrest them. A lot of the hotspots do overlap in respect of crime types. So, for example, robbery, violence, and burglary. A lot of the hotspots do feature those crime types, and as a result, we're able to ensure that our resources are deployed to those areas. We have a violence suppression unit, which also provides patrols and serves as a deterrent for any offending as well. We also have undercover cars with blue lights on who are able to respond to any incidents occurring, and as I say, being able to carry out intelligence-led proactive stop and search patrols as well. In addition to that, we have daily management meetings in respect of where those emerging hotspots are likely to be. We have extremely good links, of course, with the schools officers to look at the wider picture, but also those external officers, so Safer Transport Command and British Transport Police. It's important that we have that cooperation with all those different business groups to ensure that we all work together to tackle the issues and we're not all working in silo. Obviously, by sharing that intelligence, that enables us to make sure that our impact is much more positive. We have our own dedicated burglary focus units and robbery focus units. They obviously also share intel amongst themselves and enable us to be able to provide an emerging picture of where offences may be happening. We have standalone days of action whereby we arrest specific burglars and robbers and high harm offenders, those that cause the greatest risk to our residents. And we're able to put officers, both plainclothes and uniform, as part of that contingent to arrest those individuals. This work is ongoing and it will continue. Obviously, as the Borough Commander said earlier, we have seen a reduction in offences. However, we can't rest on our laurels and there's still lots more work to be done. And we will continue doing that and evolving the plan going forward. And as I say, any emerging patterns, we will be able to identify those and ensure that the necessary resources and resilience are in place. We'll continue obviously speaking with MOPAC to ensure that the necessary funding and revenue streams are in place to achieve all our aims and of course the ultimate goal of protecting our residents. I hope that answers the question in respect of the hotspots, and I'm more than willing to answer any more questions that anyone would have.
Thank you. Does anybody else? Scott, you have a question? And then Ian?
Yeah, just one on, sorry, I thought I was getting some feedback there. Yeah, we're just going to... I do not have Teams on. Oh, there we go. That's sorted. I don't have Teams on. Okay, back where we were. Hate crime. Yeah, it's obviously an issue that's very up in the media at the moment, and it's affected friends of mine, and it's one that really troubles me. I saw that the mayor had provided extra funding for tackling racism last month. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. I'm just wondering how that presented itself to you. Is it coming directly to you? Is it coming in different funding streams? I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, so if I can come in there, Chair. We've been given a sum of money in relation to most of the crime types to try and improve positive outcomes for victims. So I am aware of that funding stream, and that is being channeled through to our teams where officers can work additional hours to provide better support and progress inquiries in relation to hate crime. So that is an ongoing piece of work as we speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Through your good offices, Chair, could I ask that we get sent a copy of the presentation which the Borough Commander provided this evening? And might I also be bold enough to suggest that in future it will be incredibly helpful if we could have it slightly before, and that way I, for one, will be able to read it and ask more meaningful questions as a result. I found it rather hard to assimilate all that information just like that, and then to be able to ask the questions which I might otherwise have wanted to do, if that's okay. So that by preliminary.
Thank you. That do you want just that's fine. I have already asked our officer to get the slides for us and to circulate. And what I would suggest is if there are any questions that you would like to ask once you have the slides in front of you, we can ask them through the panel.
Okay, moving on. I'd like to begin by thanking Chris Jones, who has been extremely helpful and prepared to put himself up before the local community. As I'm sure the Borough Commander knows, there was a very sizable increase in problems in the Haringey Ladder areas throughout the spring and the summer. And Chris came at very short notice to a ladder meeting, which I chaired in September, where there were between 30 and 40 residents who sort of turned up at a moment's notice, and Chris, took the flak. He has since come back again last night, and last night there were only about 10 residents there, and hopefully we can read into that there has been a definite improvement in the situation, and I think we can. I entirely agree with what the leader was just saying, that you don't do anything without partnership working, and that's what's been going on in the latter area. However, there are some things I think which only the police can do, and one of the ways in which the situation has improved hugely since September is that we've had high-vis patrols in the ward, and in particular in Haringey Passage, and in particular at school picking up and leaving times. What residents have asked me to raise tonight is their concern that for a period of time in the spring and the summer, the police were pretty invisible in the ward. And I appreciate that there were COVID difficulties and staffing difficulties, of course, but what I would like to ask you is how far you think problems are exacerbated by abstraction of officers. I think I'm actually quite concerned by that as well, not just in Haringey Ward, but throughout the borough, because safer neighbourhood officers always used to be ring-fenced. And as far as I know, they're not now. And in fact, they have in the past. They seem to have been taken away at the drop of a hat. And I'm really concerned that has a visible and noticeable effect on levels of crime, particularly, drug dealing, petty crime, which leads to more serious crime. So I'm wondering what your take is on abstraction, and if it is a policy coming up from the very top, how far you can raise that at Borough Commander meetings in Scotland Yard.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for that, and thank you for your reflections on Chris Jones. I know personally the amount of effort that Chris has put into addressing community concerns, not just in relation to the ladder, but also Turnpike Lane. And I'm also more than willing to come along to those community meetings and face the flak, so to speak, if that's needed. So that offer is on the table from myself as well. I totally share your concerns about abstractions. I appreciate that it is an ongoing concern in relation to particularly neighbourhoods officers. Everywhere I go in Haringey, I hear nothing but positivity in terms of what neighbourhood officers are doing. And again, that is testament to Chris and the way he's led that strand. Unfortunately, we, as well as policing local issues, are also responsible for providing resources to Central London Aid. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, over the last few months and the summer particularly, we've had a number of very high profile public order demonstrations which have lasted a number of weeks. And we've also had Notting Hill Carnival weekend, which has caused significant pressures on police resources. At the peak of that, I was losing 98 officers a day in terms of police constables. Now, whenever that occurs and we get aid warnings into the BCU, we do have an aid hierarchy where we try as best as we can to not disrupt community policing. But unfortunately, that is not always possible. And with such high levels of aid demand, we do have to provide our share of the cake, if you like, to protect the seat of government in central London and other vulnerable political premises, as I'm sure you can appreciate. DWOs are generally ring-fenced unless an officer from Chief Officer Group say that they can be used in central London. And unfortunately, we've seen in recent weeks, because of the volume of aid requirements, those authorities coming through and dedicated ward officers have been authorised to be taken for central aid. So that's something which is really beyond my control. It's something we try to avoid where at all possible, because I do not underestimate the positive impact that our neighbourhood officers are having on local communities and in resolving local community issues. And I think all I can really say to you is that I, as the Borough Commander, and my senior leadership team will do all we can to try and prevent that from happening. But I'll always be honest and open with you as well. And there will be occasions when officers have to get taken because of the sheer demand from central London aid requirements. So hopefully that is useful for you to understand the circumstance we find ourselves in.
Thank you. Councillor Paul?
Thanks. Ooh, Lord, that's my magnetic personality, perhaps, or maybe not. Yeah, okay. So I've got probably about 5 points, and I'll be really quick. So my first, he's not going to be able to, even with my Reverend Ian Paisley voice. No, although it's an NHS one, it might well be. So my first question is probably more to the leader. So back in the deep and distant past, leader, I was chair of Scrutiny, and I did a piece of work around hard to reach, what we now call seldom heard groups, and it was very clear to me that there are some groups who don't feel comfortable and confident about engaging with the council. And I know from your personal intervention on the Somali community, which I think has been great, that we're hoping to try and break down those barriers. And it's a shame that back in the past we used to have a neighbourhood management team that actually Councillor Brabazon, when she was an officer, used to lead, and we used to have an equalities on diversity team, and those are the sort of things that they would pick up. So what can you do from your perspective as council leader to try and break down some of those barriers that exist with certain communities who don't feel confident about engaging with the council? And also, you know, I know from representatives in my ward, some people see institutions like the council with a degree of fear, and to engage with the council is quite problematic for them. So that's my first question. Second question. When I had the cabinet brief for a couple of years, there was the Turnpike Lane Steering Group. Is that still Turnpike Lane Strategy Group? But that's still going on. So that's the sort of thing that I think we ought to continue and support as much as possible. Third point, Borough Commander, I'd like to echo your observations about safer neighbourhoods teams. We've got an excellent SNT in White Hart Lane. We went through a patchy area where we had to have a guy acting up as sergeant. We've got a permanent sergeant now, and White Hart Lane Safer Neighbourhoods team is really good. And we've got a ward panel next Tuesday. I sent out an invite, and we've had over 25 people saying that they're going to come because it's on Teams, which is great. So my third question is to what extent are you and probably the council, but more your team, fully utilising the ward panels? And do you see them as a vehicle to try and address some of the challenges that you've got? Because I'm getting mixed pictures, or mixed pictures from colleagues about the success of the ward panels. Back in the day when we used to have the neighbourhood forums, you get about 120 people used to pitch up to the Muswell Hill one, and probably about 25 to the Northumberland Park White Hart Lane one. So that's a challenge. And my last 2 points, Holcombe Market you mentioned, which I think is really good. If we're talking about designing out some hotspots, there's a hotspot on Wood Green High Road, which I know Hubert Malcolm's aware of, which is close down to where the Tesco's is on the high road. It's an alleyway where we've had some problems in the past with drug dealing, and near Holcombe Market we've had problems with Brook Street, for instance, which is one road that I know is a problem. And also seems to be some mixed feelings from the marketeers on Holcombe Market, whether the CCTV's actually working. So perhaps Hubert might want to pick that up. And finally, and I'm not going to blow my own horn because I didn't do enough when I had the cabinet brief, but we need to, as a council, Perry, look at some of the empty shops issues. Now, in your ward, Knoll Park, do you know what? I lost count the amount of times I've raised the issue about the empty shop on the corner of Courcey Road, which I think used to be an old Alliance and Leicester. But those abandoned shops take down the tone of an area, which lends itself to crime subconsciously. And what can we do as a council to try and reach out? I know that Councillor Gordon's picked up the idea about writing to landlords and getting them to pull their finger out and get those properties back open. But I think we need to do a little bit more on that. So that's just some questions from me.
Thank you. So as a combination of questions.
Sorry, Chair, can I just quickly add to supplement that? Might it be useful to get a list of all the locations across the borough that has been earmarked as hotspot for redesign? So then that will allow us to fill in gaps if we think there are gaps.
I think we could come back on that. We could get a written response on that. Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Bull asked questions for a number of different officers and the leader. So Gideon, could you go through them one by one, and then we can just.
I'll be helpful. So oh, great, well done, Perry. There you go then.
I'm sure Simon has as well. I've written them down here. I was just going to come back. So on Turnpike Lane, apologise, I probably didn't explain very clearly in the outset, from the outset. So there was a strategy group which I kick-started back in 2018, actually, you'll recall, Ian. So what we decided to do is revamp that group, because it was a strategy group, but it wasn't a strategy group. It was a sort of, it'd come about after the traders group, and it was sort of a combination of resident, perhaps not so strategic, and so we sort of wanted to get that right. So I think it hasn't happened yet, but the strategy group is going to be one that I chair, along with a different set of sort of partners and stakeholders. And then what we're going to continue with is a forum, like a community forum, which Councillor Moyed, who is the current chair of Overview and Scrutiny, actually will continue to chair. So we're just kind of finalising those details. But I think it was just the need to kind of just get some stuff done, because it was, what we were finding in those strategy, there was like loads of people there, perhaps, different issues. Some of them were quite granular, some weren't, some were strategic, and it was just becoming a bit of a mixture of things. So we're going to revamp that group, and as I said, have a strategy group and then have a separate forum, and just look to kind of get some things done solidly on that. In terms of the points around community engagement, I think one of the key points that has come out from our dealings and our meetings with the Somali community, as an example, is that term hard to reach. Their term is we're not hard to reach, actually, right? If you want to reach us, you can find us. And and I think that the issues they were raising was that actually they feel that in a lot of cases they felt they were being discriminated against. They felt that their concerns weren't being taken on board, and that of course wasn't just police colleagues. That was directed at the council, at housing, at health, and all of us actually. So I think their term, their feeling was we're not hard to reach. We're here. We just want to be listened to, and we want our issues actually acknowledged. And I think just on that piece, I think there's a thing about us really understanding who our communities are in the borough and what their needs are around health, around education, around policing, around housing. And I think there is, a piece of work that we will need to do around that as well. So I think let's not use the term hard to reach. Let's just say groups that we haven't engaged with and that we'll be looking to engage further, and which we are trying, certainly. I think the rest of the questions were for Simon and his team, but I was going to say on ward panels, that's exactly the experience I've had, actually, that some seem to be working really well, others not, and I think it probably depends on the local factors and who sits on them. And I was going to ask, Tesco is that Wood Green High Road? Because there's not a Tesco on Wood Green High Road. Which one?
The Tesco Express. Next to the charity shop, there's an alleyway. You will know where it is, and it's had a
Sainsbury's, that one.
No.
Sorry.
I'll be really quick. So going down Wood Green High Road towards Turnpike Lane. So you're going on the right. You're on the right-hand side, which is I think both sides of Wood Green High Road are yours. But anyway, there's a small Tesco Express near the Costa Coffee on the end.
Oh,
yeah.
God,
Yeah.
Sorry,
so there's an alleyway there that's been a hot spot for a long time. It's had a gate and it's been ripped off. So it's those sort of hot spots. Yeah.
It's linked with the whole Turnpike Lane.
Yeah, great.
Sorry.
The only thing I wanted you to answer was around what more you can do to try and sort out some of these high street areas where there's quite a few closed shops, like Tottenham High Road was one, opposite Peacocks, that sort of area. That was it, thanks.
So I think that's probably a wider issue, and one that we can probably get a response from Councillor Gordon and the Regen team and the High Streets team on. But I think it's a good point, and I think it's actually an interesting point, because coming out of the pandemic, it would be quite useful to know actually what the impact has been, because the High Street was in decline anyway prior, and it would just be really useful to know what the kind of response. But we can perhaps get you a more detailed response to that.
Councillor Ball, if I can come in at that point, just in relation to your question related to ward panels, I think it's probably more appropriate for Chris to answer that, because obviously that's his portfolio and he's got a far better understanding of the ward panel situation. So I'll default to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Simon. Just in terms of the council, so I made it very, very clear when I first came into post 2 years ago around the consistency around wall panels and the representation. So we need to get the right demographics around that ward panel to really represent the views and the voices of the communities within that ward. That's led on to a number of conversations with faith leaders and looking at some of the public health mapping for certainly the eastern side of Haringey and Enfield around, are we getting the right people around the table setting those policing local priorities and really targeting on wards with low confidence. So there is a ward panel improvement plan which I can share with the group, That has been implemented. It's still in progress, and that is overseen by me. I have a very clear expectation, as I'm sure it aligns with the BCU commander, that the ward sergeant attends the ward panel and provides that degree of leadership and that seniority when they come and speak to the community around setting the priorities. And I think when I first arrived, it had kind of gone off the boil a little bit, to put it bluntly, and some ward panels were getting representations from PCSOs, which weren't always best placed to understand what was happening strategically across the borough, but certainly how the wards are being affected. So that plan is being implemented as we speak, and I can share that with the panel so you can have a look at the areas we're focusing on. But it has a mixture of representation from the community, but also leadership from the police locally.
Thank you. Hubert?
Thank you, Chair. There are two things there, one from Councillor Edgerhall and one from Councillor Ball. So in regards to redesigning hotspots, one of our focuses is looking at these hotspots to see what we can do about them holistically. So the three areas where there's a big partnership focus, it won't be any surprise, it's around Duckett's Common and Turnpike Lane. Currently looking at Tottenham Hell, where if you look at hotspots, there's an issue there, and Northumberland Park. So I'll be happy to provide Councillor Edgerhall a written response in terms of what we're doing about redesigning those areas. The leader summed it up for me. You cannot police your way out of any issues, but as a partnership, looking at early intervention, we can solve those issues. So redesigning is only one aspect of solving an issue, combined with graffiti, combined with litter, really, that broken window syndrome. Councillor Ball mentioned Tesco's. Yes, we're aware of Tesco's. As you mentioned, previous measures have been vandalised. So as part of the wider Turnpike Lane picture, Councillor, we will be looking at that specific location going forward. So hopefully that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you to my panel. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, in terms of reporting of crime, I was looking specifically at drug offences. Now, I presume that relies on them actually being recorded by the police. So we saw a drop in drug offences, but how much of that do you think is our failure to actually record? Because we get a lot of anecdotal evidence of people complaining about drug dealing in their neighbourhoods, but the police don't come out at all. So in that case, I presume they won't be showing up in the figures. Is that correct?
So I think it's fair to say that there is a trust and confidence issue piece around drugs, and I've seen numerous correspondence from local councillors, local MPs in relation to antisocial behaviour, where there has been perceived drug dealing taking place outside of houses. And of course, if police are unable to attend at the time because it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they're dealing with emergency situations, then those matters won't necessarily be recorded. And that obviously impacts trust and confidence. So that's a really challenging and concerning area for me. But we do try our utmost to attend where we possibly can. And again, that generally falls to Chris and his teams to respond to local ASB issues, which would involve potentially drug offences. Chris, is there anything you wanted to say around the drugs ASB piece?
Yeah, so I agree with the chair in many ways. So you will see an uptick in drugs offences in Turnpike Lane because we've had so many recent arrests for drug possession, but also drugs with possession with drugs with the intent to supply them. So you will start to see a shift in those figures, certainly in the Turnpike Lane area, because we're concentrating around there. Operation Taipan, as said earlier, was a specific neighbourhood team set up around drugs and really tackling community information leading to drug warrants and execution of warrants to do with cannabis farms, etc. and really that's to sort of take away the maybe the perception that Central Met assets come into the borough and don't know the difficulties and context of some of the communities and the history, and so the neighbourhood officers could really focus and respond to those community concerns around drugs, but do it in a sensitive and a pragmatic and proactive way. So I agree with your overall premise that actually you will see an uptick in drug offences, recorded offences, because officers will be dedicated to those hotspots and making those interventions.
Thank you. The second question that I have is regarding, you gave a figure earlier, I think it was 194 rapes that had taken place in the borough over the past year. And I was wondering what our percentage of sexual offences actually goes to trial. We know that the percentage has dropped to a minusculely low figure nationally. And I wondered, of those 195, what percentage of those are we expecting or have we seen actually get to trial?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you quite rightly say, sexual offences, particularly rape offences, are very, very challenging in terms of getting those cases to trial. Obviously, SEB leads on sexual offences and rape BCU, so it's probably appropriate, and SEB will have more detail to bring SEB in again at this point, so he can give you some detail around that.
So I would start by saying that the tariff for rape is the same as murder or attempt murder. The cases typically go to Crown Court. They all go to Crown Court. So because of the seriousness of the offence, the case building can take any time between 6 months to 12 months. So it's always difficult to judge sanction detection rates for the here and now, because often the cases that you're looking at are cases that have been investigated, or cases that have been charged to court have been cases that have been investigated for maybe 1-2 years. What I would say is our current sanction detection rate for rape is 1.8%, and that's for the financial year to date. The national picture is 3%, and Met-wide it is around 3%. It's incredibly challenging at the moment. We do have issues in terms of the way we work with the Crown Prosecution Service, and I would say that one of the major issues that have come about now in terms of rape investigation is firstly the downloading of phones, the phone work that goes on, and also accessing third-party material. So these cases are infinitely more complex than they were maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I would say in terms of the BCU's effort, recently we've injected a number of staff into our Sapphire teams. Our Sapphire teams that specialise in rape and serious sexual offences, they are pretty much up to full strength. There's been a lot of investment around that. They've been bolstered in terms of training, support from central teams. There's also a project that's going Met-wide around, it's called Bluestone, Project Bluestone, which looks at the attrition rate of victims in terms of rape cases. And I'm really confident that that investment will see an uptick in terms of our rape convictions. But as I said, there is that time lag. The cases that my teams are investigating now, we will see the results maybe next year. So it is very much being patient and being resilient around what we're doing.
Thank you. And finally, with regard to our hotspots and the amount of resources we put into them, how much displacement are we getting, and how are we dealing with and tracking that displacement? So obviously, if we put resources into an area because it's a hotspot, the crime doesn't necessarily just disappear. It may disappear from that area, but goes somewhere else. And how are we tracking that across the borough?
Thank you, Chair. I'll bring Paul Ridley in on this point because obviously he's the violence lead and he's already given you a brief around the hotspots, and I know Paul is aware of that displacement issue.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, we do track it for that very reason, that we don't want to move the problem elsewhere. Having looked at the data for the last 12 months, and indeed a little bit longer than that, the hotspots have remained static despite the action that we've completed. So, as I said earlier, the boroughs that are on the east, the areas on the east of the borough, so Northumberland Park, Tottenham Hale, and Seven Sisters and White Hart Lane, have remained constant, and we haven't seen evidence of that crime being displaced or pushed elsewhere. The advantage of carrying out the daily statistical analysis and reviewing those crime types, especially around the robberies and the violence, it enables us to flex our resources on a daily basis. So we will review that every day as opposed to waiting, as I said earlier, for the problems to emerge. We try and tackle those straight away. So our hotspots have remained static, and at this time the evidence of displacement seems nominal. But of course, that's something that we will continue to track.
Thanks, Paul. And Chair, if I could just come in and add a little bit more detail around that. So we are one of the first BCUs to actually have what we call is a robbery bronze officer, and that will be a supervising officer who will look at offences which occur whilst they're on duty and will redeploy assets as is necessary to cover off any crimes that are being committed outside of our traditional hotspot areas. And that's been hugely successful on North area and been adopted by other BCUs as best practice. We also have, outside of that officer's working hours, an inspector that works in the operations room based at Edmonton Police Station, and they are what we call silver for the BCU. So basically when the senior leadership team are not in, they have primary responsibility for asset deployment across the BCU. And again, if they see an emerging crime type which is occurring in the early hours of the morning, for instance, they will redeploy asset that we may have on duty to target those particular areas. So all in all, a very flexible plan. We can flex resource across to wherever offences may be occurring. We have a number of officers on duty at any one time to make sure that we achieve that. Chris, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Thomas. It's really just to supplement yourself and Paul really around how the teams integrate with each other across the BCU and across the borough. So another one of my teams is Operation Boxster, which concentrates on a violent hotspot in 4th Street, but also a spot where there's on-street sex workers and drugs, and that team is dedicated to the problem. So if it moves into Edmonton, the team move into Edmonton with it. And if it moves further into Tottenham, down by the Spurs Stadium, then the team just follow wherever that problem goes. And so you're not getting that dispersal, certainly within the BCU. And the same, I would say, with Operation Taipan. Operation Taipan are working, obviously, as you know, in Turnpike Lane. Once the town centre team's embedded in place, then Taipan will be moved again to supplement the work that Paul does, but also the work that the BC commander explained around the silver. So the Taipan team will move around and pick up displacements of robbery or drug crime.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you very much for attending this evening's meeting. It's been very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
And thank you to the leader as well for coming to present this evening. The panel will note that in the papers there is a Haringey Crime and ASB Hotspots paper, and that is just for noting, so if we could note that, please.
Noted.
Are there any questions on that? I think we covered it, we've covered it in there. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Bull has a question.
Yeah.
Could Hubert, if you're still there, can we ask you a question? Can Councillor Bull please ask the question?
Thanks. Hey, Hubert. So there was just one question around enforcement tools, and it was just around whether we think as a council, and I didn't realise that this enforcement of this comes under you. I thought it came under Mark Stevens, but he pointed me and you in my direction. One of the things that I haven't seen on here, maybe I missed it, was a recognition of hotspots around fly tipping, which is still an enforcement issue. And I know from my own ward where the hotspots are. And I also know that Veolia, I mean, people have got mixed views about Veolia. My experience with Veolia is they've been excellent in White Hart Lane ward in terms of really getting on top. But the fundamental issue for me, and I won't do too much prefacing, is it's all very well having fly tipping hotspots, but what we need to do is stop people fly tipping in the first place. And the issue I've always had ever since I joined this council, as soon as we outsourced our refuse collection service, was every single contract owner, the company signed a contract that pretty much said that they will clear as much fly tipping as the residents of this borough are willing to dump. So my question is, where's the incentive on the council to ensure that we reduce the level of fly tipping? Because we know that we've got a provider that's just going to take away the fly tipping anyway. So what are we doing to educate people, bringing back that degree of civic pride that when Lorna Reep was cabinet member, she led on, which I think was something we ought to do again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So yes, a very good question. As you've identified that Veolia is within my portfolio, and as the Assistant Director for Stronger and Safer Communities, we look at that broken window syndrome. So we've spoken about places where there might be drug dealing. You might find those places that have got graffiti, those places that have also got fly tipping. So the amount of work we do is depends on what the issue is. So I'm going to get a feedback.
The feedback's not on our side.
Okay. Thank you. So, Councillor, the things we do on hotspots depends on what the issue of the hotspot is. I have got a particular hotspot that I have witnessed on my way into the borough, top of Northumberland Park. I see that I go to the gym every morning, so there's a hotspot there. So if I use that as an example, so at this hotspot, it's in front of a block of flats, and what we can see is that residents are using that position to place refuse and black bags. So what we have done there is we have put up CCTV, relocatable cameras. We've got a wall of shame, which we readily publicise residents dumping. We have visited every single one of the residents in that block, give them leaflets about how they can dispose of their waste. We have put signage up. We have actually put an A board up. With all those different initiatives, I've actually seen a reduction in that fly tipping hotspot. I don't know if you know the hotspot that I'm talking about. So you know, it's a number of issues, a number of things that we have to do really to tackle the issue. It's not really one size fits all. We find that by putting up a camera, that might stop it. In this case, it didn't. So it's about engaging the residents, working with Veolia also. Veolia have got outreach that they'll also knock residents' doors with us, really just to provide information about the problem, but also providing information how people can dispose of their refuse accordingly. Also, you can see that we're rolling our black boxes across the borough. Residents can put some of their waste in as well. So it's not one size fits all. It depends on the situation, but we have staff, as you know, that will go around, look at those hotspots and really trying to tackle those. And hotspots around the borough, we can see that there have been an actual reduction in fly tipping, but it's not a quick fix, as you know, Councillor. It does take some time, really, and also holding landowners to task as well. It might be a housing motor occupation where we can talk to that landlord, issue community protection warnings about, you know, disposal of waste responsibly. So a short answer to what can be a very complicated question, that, you know, a multitude of things are put in place to try and address it, Councillor. Does that answer your question?
but I'm going to come back with a very small one, and you'll be pleased to know it's not going to be Somerset Gardens, because that's a big issue. But residents in the borough don't always recognise when something's not the public highway, and you and I both know there's another hotspot, which is in Pembury Road, because I go past there when I go from the other gym that I use, and so it's just off the public highway, and it's actually a private piece of land. So my question back to you is, what more can we do to work with some of those landowners to get their act together? Because I've had instances in the past when I've reported that on the app, and it's come back and said we can't clear that because it's on private land. Now residents there, they really don't give tuppence who owns the land. They live in Haringey, they don't want to see it looking like a dump, quite frankly. So what I want to know is, what can we do to pin the ears back of some of these landowners and make sure they pull their weight? Thank you.
So, Councillor, again, it is again holding those landowners to task. We can issue community protection warnings, community protection notices to make sure that those landowners are not only clearing the waste but also putting up measures to prevent any dump in the first place. We've got areas where landowners have put up hoarding, they've put up fences really to restrict the dump in the first place, but also we hold them to task about how are they engaging with their tenants about how they're supposed to dispose of their refuse. You know, you've got a written response for Somerset Gardens where their approach has reduced the issue, but also it's one size doesn't fit all, and sometimes these things do take some time for us to address. But yeah, it's really holding those landowners to task and getting them to put measures in place. And you're right, the residents in the borough don't really mind or don't really care if it's on our highway or on private land. All they don't want to see is issues that blight our borough, and neither do I and neither do you, Councillor.
That's great, thank you, Hubert.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the paper on hotspot? Thank you, Hubert. The email address for ASB, can we try and get that publicised more widely? Because I don't know about anybody else, but when residents are reporting ASB to me, I've told them, you know, to report, and I've reported, but I didn't actually know about this specific email address.
I didn't.
So if we could actually
publicised, or unless you want, it is already publicised as far as I'm aware.
Okay, if we could just, because Councillor Bull and I both hadn't picked it up, so if we haven't, then I presume other people hadn't. Thank you.
Perhaps you have more ASB in Muswell on that.
Okay, I think that's fine then. I think we have no further questions for you. Thank you very much for presenting tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Have a good evening.
Thank you. You too. Thank you. Okay, if we can look at the work programme going forward, which is in your pack on page 33. Gideon.
Just going to raise one issue, which won't come as any surprise to you. I'm just a little bit concerned that because we didn't have the cabinet member for, I can't think of the title, SEMA, she's not coming until March. And I'm a little bit concerned about that, and I was hoping that we could find a way of, because she's got so much good stuff to tell us, and there's so many issues that we want to raise with her, and she's very approachable, but I'd like to be able to do some of it through scrutiny. Now, I know that she's coming for the budget, but I think we can only ask her questions relating to her portfolio on the budget. So have we got any capacity to squeeze her in somewhere, especially because she's always sending out stuff about what she's doing, and it's been quite useful through the scrutiny system to ask her some questions, if that's okay.
I think that would be really useful, but other than us putting in another meeting, I don't really think we unfortunately our timetable it's very tight for the year, and especially for this year, because it's a short year and we go into Purdah in March. So I don't think we can see her before the 3rd of March, I'm afraid. That's my feeling on it. It's just not going to have time.
There's a way we can send potential written questions as a panel. If we
Yes, I
have
would
anything specific relating to her role that we want to ask.
Yeah, we went ahead with the meeting with officers, although she wasn't able to attend because she had at very late notice had to take time off. And we decided we would still go ahead because the officers were already all booked. You know, the meeting was already all booked, but it is problematic, and we have got coming as well to the meeting on the 14th. We also have the tree strategy update. So we're going to get Councillor Hakata to come in to that. But if there's anything else that you, as members, would really like to see on the next two meetings, please can you let us know. It is difficult for us to squeeze it in. The timetables are tight. But if there's anything we can, I think we need to see Councillor Hakata because his is a large part of what we're doing, and then we'll see SEMA again in March. If we could look at our low traffic neighbourhood review. Now, I've spoken about this before, and I'd like some feedback in case there's anything else. But I don't think that it's I don't think it's necessarily completely helpful for us to get into a debate about whether or not a low traffic neighbourhood, whether people like them or not. It's a very divided in terms of opinions, and I don't think that necessarily that's going to be particularly helpful. We'll get a whole lot of people coming and saying they're very good and a whole lot of people coming and saying they're very poor. What I'm more interested in our role as scrutiny is to try and ensure that they actually are dealt with in Haringey in the best possible way, and to take evidence from other boroughs where they've brought in LTNs to see where it's worked and where it hasn't worked, and try and, if we can try to determine why. We know that in some, and I'm talking about inner London, I always said I want to know about Walthamstow because it's a different place. So that's kind of where I see the focus as being, but I'd like some feedback on that. Councillor Chihol?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. My only comment, and maybe because I don't understand what, looking at the witnesses, I may not understand what SOSTRANs and other advocacy organisations, what that means, but it would really be useful because obviously there have been quite vocal opponents to this, and I don't seem to see at least maybe one of the groups here to also give evidence so that their objection is formally given the same weight as all the other witnesses. That's the only comment I have. Oh, I don't, any of the opponents, they're quite a opposition, exactly, and they're quite loud. So I don't seem to see it on the witness, unless SOSTRANs is supposed to mean that. But it would make sense for us to have one of the opposition groups have their concerns formally noted and given equal weight.
Sorry, if we note the concerns of one of the opposition groups, then we will at the same time have to note the concerns of us not going ahead with one of the groups, such as the cycling campaigns or one of the street campaigns, which would mean us putting in a session
because it's not
just
really
to hear that,
if we don't have both voices there, is it?
Phil, could you look at it and see whether we can squeeze that in?
Yeah, sure. So I take your point about the need for balance, the review. I guess following from what Councillor Collin was saying, that you really wanted to steer away from any sort of discussion as to whether LTNs were, whether they were a good or a bad thing, and you wanted to specifically focus around where it's gone, the experiences of other boroughs, and if you pick one, say where it's went well, and one where it possibly hasn't. And use that
I
as
get
sort of
that. It just allows us to preempt any criticism that the review is not thorough.
I
That's
think
the only reason I want to
I
include
think
it, not to sway a decision anyway.
yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think in terms of that, yes, I think, and thank you, because I think possibly we may come in for criticism of like we have examined LTNs, but we haven't actually taken any evidence. So if we could try and put in one session.
Okay.
To just preempt that, but I think it's not a bad.
Or against group, and just have a.
We would have to have both of them, and
exactly.
if we did that in one meeting and had a group that were in favour and a group that opposed, just so that we hear those views, possibly an early meeting.
Yeah.
Towards the beginning.
Yeah, obviously, if you have specific groups in mind, that would be helpful.
So in favour, we could invite Living Streets, because as far as I know, they're very in favour. And opposed, I'll find a group that's opposed to LTNs. We'll have a look at it. I'll look at it tomorrow.
Can I ask colleagues, I'm probably one of the lucky ones that's got really reasonable, flexible working, and I work principally from home, which is really good. What's your flexibility like in terms of being able to do a Teams meeting during the day, or are you just evening only?
Impossible.
Ditto. I work in a very busy regulatory organisation, and I'm dealing with Brexit, so no, I can't do it.
Are stretched. We're all stretched for time, so but we'll squeeze it in. Okay. Scott, yes.
One little one. Can we just put in there something about low-cost LTNs? Because I think there's quite an important thing that I've seen in other areas is an idea of not having a massive big LTN which costs tens of thousands of pounds, but putting in some small planters and stuff like that, and just trying to work it that way. Just looking at low-cost ideas. I
think that might come out to a certain extent in terms of where they work and where they don't work. So what I'm interested in, for example, is there are ones in Hackney and Islington that seem to be working, seem to be settling. But Ealing, for example, took out all their LTNs, and the only ones that they kept in were two really small ones. So that might come out in terms of where they have worked and where they haven't. So I'd be quite interested to know how big. That's the kind of evidence. How big are the ones? Why did they work? Are they very big? Are the ones that have been very big more successful in terms of what they achieve? In Ealing, they found that it hadn't achieved what they wanted. The big ones weren't achieving what they wanted. Emissions weren't down, etc. So there was no point for them. So that we can try and preempt some of those things. Is there any other business?
Sorry, Chair. So just formally, subject to the points made, you're happy to approve the outline work programme? We'll take that up to the main committee for them to agree.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And is there any other business other than that?
Can I ask about the pre-meet? What was it to do with? The pre-meet that was supposed to happen at 6 o'clock. I received an invite.
I'll have a chat to you afterwards about that outside the meeting. This is not recorded. So really quickly, Chair, just to say that we have budget scrutiny coming up in December, and as a preliminary part of that, I would like to arrange a briefing session for the panel and finance officers, performance officers, just so they can present the information to you, and it's an opportunity for you to raise possible areas where you want more information on the panel meeting itself, so that we don't get to a position where you. So anyway, the timescales are very tight. So basically, we have the 30th of November or the 1st of December. I don't know if you want to have a show of hands, or you have a preference.
Yeah, I don't think I can make either. I've got a Alexandra Palace committee.